Good morning. So I noticed something this morning while we were preparing. I know you won't see it, but I had last week's bulletin in my hand, right? And so we've been using the same picture. I don't know if you've been playing around with it. I chose it on purpose for our season of Pentecost, which we usually at our church take Pentecost and then kind of add maybe 5-6 weeks to keep the red going instead of changing to green, and kind of focus on things that are about the Holy Spirit. Anyway, so last week, this is what the bulletin cover looked like with the normal thing you have. Do you notice how dim the color is compared to the one that you have in your hand? It can mean one of two things. I'll give you options, like a multiple choice test, okay? It could mean A, we got a new toner. Or it could mean B, that the Spirit is just growing during Pentecost.
I'm gonna go for C. Can I vote for C?
For a moment that makes meaning out of anything and everything, I'm choosing option B. And so let's continue to walk into this season of Pentecost together, imagining what the Spirit is calling us to be and to do individually and then together as a community of faith. Let's imagine the Spirit's working in us as we spend some time in songs of meditation.
Now let's turn our hearts and minds towards Scripture as we look to see the Word that God has for us this morning. Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 through 6. You'll find it on page 580 of your Old Testament. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, or even to 8, for you know not what evil may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know how the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God, who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand. For you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good.
Our second text comes from Exodus chapter 16. It's found on page 59 of your Pew Bible. We're going to skip around a little. We'll read verses 4 to 5, and then we'll skip to verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. And then skipping to verse 14. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flaky-like thing, fine as hoarfrost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, every one of you, as much as each one can eat. You shall take an omer apiece, according to the number of the persons whom each of you has in his tent." And the people of Israel did so. They gathered, some more, some less. When they had measured it with an omer, the one that gathered much had nothing over, and the one that gathered little had no lack. Each gathered according to what each could eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it till the morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and became foul. Ew. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning, they gathered it, each as much as he could eat, and when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers apiece. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over, lay by it to keep, whatever, lay by to keep, whatever, lay by to be kept. Lay by? That's not a verb. Lay by to be kept till the morning. Keep it till morning." So they laid it till the morning, as Moses bade them, and it did not become foul, and there were no worms in it. Yay! Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none." Now on the 7th day, some of the people went out together, and they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore on the 6th day, God gives you bread for 2 days. Remain every person as you in your own place. Let no one go out on the 7th day." So the people rested on the 7th day. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. The word of the Lord. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Goldilocks. And she went for a walk in the forest, and pretty soon she came upon a house, and she knocked, and when no one answered, she walked right in. And at the table in the kitchen, there were 3 bowls of porridge. Goldilocks was hungry. And so she tasted the porridge in the first bowl, and this porridge, she says, is too hot. So she tasted the porridge in the second bowl, and she said, this porridge is too cold. So she tasted the last bowl of porridge, and she said, ah, this is just right. What is just right? How much is just right? How little, how hot, how big, how small, how cold, how heavy, how light? What is just right? Is it completely subjective, or are there standards for just right? Is it cultural? Is it familial? Is our understanding of just right motivated by our childhood or by society? In our Hebrew text today, just right is determined by God. Now, the people have been delivered from slavery, right? Their every day until now was dictated by the workload of Pharaoh. Now, those who are enslaved often go without. And when they don't go without, they are afraid that one day they will again go without. They live in fear. But now the people, they're not slaves anymore, right? They're free. And so they're journeying through the desert, and they're en route to the promised land. And they're hungry. And so they grumble to Moses, and God heard them and came up with this plan. Every morning, God will provide bread from heaven. Each morning, the people are to gather just enough food for each day, about an omer, and then thanks to Wikipedia, we know that an omer is just about 3.64 liters, right? So just short of a gallon. Now, can you picture them with me, right? Each family, they wake up sleepy, and the kids cuddle on the couch with their parents in their tent, and the older one maybe is hunched in the corner watching what I would call Lizard Lenny, which is essentially SpongeBob, but the desert version, right? And so the show begins to end, and the mama gathers the family, and she says, come on, it's time to gather the manna, and like the obligatory, Mom, do we have to gather manna today? Happens, and she moves on and gets them, and they all get out of the tent, and other families have gathered too, and they're gathering, and they wave and smile to one another. They're grabbing this substance that looks like coriander seed, it says, and it tastes like honey. How much do they collect? They collect just the right amount for every day. One time, it said, the neighbor tried to collect enough for 2 days, thinking they may be able to take the day off and go to Six Flags, but oh no, it has worms in you. So they collect just the right amount. On the 6th day, a very, very odd thing happens though. They actually have to collect 2 days' worth because they're supposed to take a planned day off when they don't collect anything. And again, some of the neighbors think, oh, I'm too busy on the 6th day, so I don't collect enough. And we'll just go out the next morning. What happens? There's no bread. So God determines in this story just the right amount. God determines a time of rest, a day off. God determines what is just right. And the people comply, it says. They have lived in orientation to Pharaoh for so long. He determined their workload, whether or not they rested. But now they must reorient themselves to God's way of work and rest. The people were motivated by fear and scarcity, living as slaves. But now they're free, and so they're being led by God. What better way to reorient them than to start with their food supply? God was beginning to teach them what was just right. They're being reoriented to God's wisdom. Right there, friends, just so you know my own neuroses, I can't stand that misword that I just did. It's the one I correct everyone. Reorientated is not a word. You either orient someone or you don't, but you don't orientate them. Okay? So, God is beginning to orient them in a different direction. Everyone has one. I know you all have your own favorite hated non-word that people use. We could go into it, but alas. Okay, so God is reorienting them to wisdom, right? So let's go to that Ecclesiastes passage that Michael read. The subject of the entire book of Ecclesiastes is really, it's the writer's attempt to poke holes in the current wisdom of the day. And the writer pulls no punches, right? The world's wisdom does not shake out, is really the author's bottom line. It doesn't produce. The world is not to be trusted. Do not rely heavily on its ways. Don't cling to the world's methods. The first line, cast your bread on the water, and you will find it come back to you. I love how Maya Angelou interprets this text. I don't know if you know her line. She says, when we cast our bread upon the waters, we can presume that someone downstream, whose face we will never know, will benefit from our action, as we are downstream from another will profit from the grantor's gift, right? So casting your bread on the water doesn't mean that, like, it's going to swim back to the same direction, right? Casting your bread assumes it's done. It's feeding someone else. Casting our bread is the way of saying trusting solely on oneself does not work. We don't live in a vacuum. Then the writer goes on to say, right, divide your wealth into 7 or 8 ways, right? It's a plug for a diversified portfolio. Don't put your eggs in one basket. The world is simply not that reliable. The writer continues, as you know, I love this line, what is wrong with me today? As you know not what is the way of the wind, or how the Spirit comes to to the bones in the womb of a pregnant woman. Even so, you do not know the work of God. And doesn't it end with like, and where a tree lays, there it lays? Right? Like, really? The writer is not a cynic, right? The writer has bumped up against his or her limits in life. Here is where humans begin and end. And beyond that is mystery attributed to God alone, is what the writer is trying to say. So what is our role then? In the morning, sow your seed. In the evening, withhold not your hands. Be diligent, be faithful. Sounds about right. Maybe even just right. What is just right? What is just the right amount of work? Is it 5 days or 6 days? Is it 40 hours? Does it have a lunch hour from 12 to 1 or a siesta from 1 to 3? What is just right? Is it working until someone is so exhausted that sitting in front of the television is all that is manageable? Is that just right? What is the just right amount of rest? Is it 8 hours or 6 hours with a 2-hour nap in the afternoon? Is it 1 day off or is it a weekend? What's just right? What's the just right amount of groceries? How about this one? A year ago, I was challenged to shop for groceries based on what we were going to eat for the week. That's probably not new news, right? A lot of people shop based on their menu for the week, right? But the real challenge was that at the end of my week, my refrigerator would be empty. Purchase just the right amount of food, no more, no less. Now, the first thing I had to do, and I'm putting him on the spot, usually he hears my sermons first, so I'm sorry. The first thing I had to do was talk to Pete about this idea, because when we were first married, he told me that he has issues with an empty refrigerator, right? He was raised by a grandma from the Depression era, right? She cooked all day. There was food always in the house, tons of it, right? Tons and tons and tons. And I didn't grow up with an empty refrigerator either, so this was something we had to talk about. Somehow that translated, and he would say to him that it translated, my people will survive, as long as there is a lot of food in the refrigerator, right? So that's true. That's true for a lot of people, especially if you were raised by a Depression-era mom or dad or grandparent. It's true. They witnessed too many people truly living in scarcity. So there's no knock on it. They really saw that. So I sat with Pete and we talked about the kind of scarcity that he and I had actually seen. Not the stuff we were taught about from other people or the stuff that we see on the TV that is real, but the stuff we had actually witnessed. And so here were my two stories at the time, which is what I had. When I was a youth pastor, I had a colleague who was basically living off spaghetti because it was cheap. I had another colleague who claimed vegetarianism, mostly because it was cheaper than buying meat. So they weren't really eating vegetables, because that's expensive too, right? But that's it. That's the only kind of real scarcity I have known. Neither of them were dying of hunger, right? They just lived with scarcity. They were also 20-something, right? So they weren't like a growing boy or an elderly person in need, right? So we're talking, right? So I don't know anyone personally who has died of hunger. Now that is not to say that that doesn't happen all around the world, which this community of faith cares deeply about and does things about. So I'm just talking about me, what's just right for Pete and I. So back to the grocery list. My refrigerator looks very different this year than it did last year. It's primarily empty. Freaks my sister-in-law out. There are always eggs, always half and half because that's what I put in my coffee. There is milk and juice because Julia is at our house regularly. There is always ham and cheese because that is Pete's favorite lunch, right? I make bread, and so there's usually dough in my refrigerator. But the rest of the fridge is filled with leftovers that I eat for lunch or food that is being cooked this week. It's a huge discipline for me. I'm just sharing it for me. If you guys are here, I'm telling you to do that. Just using personal examples of what is just right. This is my example of what is just right. And I share it knowing that there is a brand new BJ's on Route 1 that is about to be joined by a brand new Costco across the street from it, right? I share this knowing that buying in bulk is often cost effective. also share this knowing that just like the newly freed Hebrew slaves, our food supply is a really good first place to start when we're talking about what is just right. There are other places to wrestle with just right, though. What is just the right amount of play, of entertainment, of the internet? What is the just right amount of clothes? I have a friend who loves clothes more than me, but maybe not more than others, and she has a system. Here's her system. She keeps a washer on every hanger. Right? Washer, you know what I mean? Washer? Everyone nodding head? Okay. She keeps a washer on every hanger. And when she wears something, she takes the washer off. And at the end of the year, any piece of clothing on a hanger that still has a washer gets donated or thrown away. What is just the right amount of clothes? What is just the right amount of books? Or toys? Or musical instruments? Right?
Remember that next time you call me to play.
I know. Listen, like just, God forbid anyone leave thinking, Beth's got some stuff together. Oh no, let me tell you that the Stewards family is attached to our stringed instruments, right? Answering the question of what is just right is much harder in this area for us. I don't know what your area is. How about for us as a community of faith? What is just right for our community? Because each year the session wrestles, your elders wrestle with our budget to determine what is just right. Before they ask you to consider how much we each give to church, they have sought to answer the question, what is just the right amount of spending? And I'll be honest with you, they are incredibly conservative. They are always thinking how they could There are always things, I have an issue with reading things. There are always things that could cost more, but they are frugal. There would be easier ways to get things done, but they do it themselves, and they save money for the church. They seek what is just the right amount of spending, just the right amount of programs, just the right amount of giving, just the right amount of caring for one another. They are called to figure out what's just the right amount because they assume they need for you to figure out what is just the right amount of giving for you. What is just right? Just right has to do with our orientation. To what are we oriented? The Hebrew slaves were oriented to Pharaoh. They had a certain way of thinking. God was reorienting them. What if God said to us, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day you shall go out and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test you, is what it says, whether you will follow my instruction or not. Just right has to do with who or what we are facing. Just right has to do with our orientation. Do we work as unto our boss or as unto God? Do we eat as unto ourselves or as unto God? Do we buy as the market or our wallets can bear? Or do we shop as unto God? What is just right? What is just right? I pray that we are people who orient ourselves to what God says is just right. Amen. May we be people who listen to God's voice that instructs us what is just right. Might you find that before you somewhere this week. Might you go with the love of God ahead of you, the grace of Christ all around you. And might you hear the voice of the Spirit that says, this is the way.